She was 16 years and 4 months old on the night everything she owned fit inside 2 garbage bags. Her sister Delia was 12. They stood together on the gravel driveway of the house where they had both grown up, and the air smelled of diesel exhaust from the county road and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney 2 lots over. Someone else's warmth, drifting past them and continuing on. The gravel was wet from an afternoon rain, and it pressed through the split at the left toe of her sneaker with every small shift of her weight, cold and specific and impossible to ignore. Behind them, the porch light clicked off, not burned out, not forgotten, clicked off. There is a difference, and she knew it immediately, the way you know certain things in your body before your mind has finished forming the thought. Gerald Marsh had waited exactly 14 months after their mother's death before having the eviction notice served. 14 months, long enough that a person might call it grief, might call it adjustment, might call it him giving the girls time to get on their feet. That was how Gerald operated. He did everything at the precise distance from cruelty, where it could still be called reasonable. The notice was legal. The process had been followed. There was nothing to contest and no one to call, because their mothers had signed the deed over to Gerald 3 weeks before she died, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and recirculated air, in a hand so unsteady it barely cleared the signature line. Gerald had been there with a notary public. The girls had not been told the meeting was happening. By the time they understood what had been signed, the ink had been dry for 22 days, and their mother had been in the ground for 19. In her left hand, she held a set of keys on a rusted ring. 3 keys, iron-colored and cold, mailed to her 6 weeks earlier by a Granger County probate clerk with a form letter she had read 4 times without fully understanding. The keys belonged to her grandfather's property, 43 acres somewhere in Granger County, that the family had quietly stopped mentioning after Elias Calloway died in 1971, the same year she was born. Delia was crying, softly, with the particular effort of someone trying very hard not to. She did not cry. She looked at the 3 keys in her palm and thought, he left us something. She didn't know yet what that meant. But Gerald Marsh was watching from behind a dark window, certain he had won, and he had never been more wrong about anything in his life. The will reading had taken place 6 weeks before the night on the driveway, in the 3rd-floor offices of an estate attorney named Hargrove, and the room smelled of lemon furniture polish and old paper and the particular warmth of a radiator working too hard, the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders and makes you feel slightly less than you already do. Gerald arrived first. He always arrived first. He wore a charcoal's wool suit she would later learn had cost $1,400, and a gold watch that caught the overhead light every time he shifted in his chair, which was often. His companion, not yet his wife but already occupying the space beside him with proprietary ease, wore a cream blouse and kept her hand resting lightly on his forearm, as though anchoring something valuable. They smelled of dry cleaning and a cologne that was synthetic and faintly sweet, the kind of scent designed to suggest wealth to people who recognize the bottle. She and Delia sat across the table in their school clothes. Attorney Hargrove read the estate distribution without inflection, which was its own kind of cruelty. Gerald received the family home, assessed at $214,000. He received the liquid savings account, which held $43,800. He received the life insurance payout of $187,500. He received both vehicles and their contents. Hargrove turned a page. The girls received their grandfather's Granger County property, 43 acres of heavily wooded hill land with no utilities connected, and a structure the documents described, with bureaucratic precision, as a farmhouse of uncertain habitability. Gerald did not bother to hide his smile. He leaned across the table, far enough that she could smell his cologne clearly now, sweet and synthetic and close. And he said it in the tone of a man performing generosity for a room he controlled. Your grandfather was a stubborn old man who held on to worthless land his whole life. I suppose it makes sense he'd leave it to the two of you. His companion touched his arm. He sat back. She looked at the 3 keys in her palm, heavy, cold, their teeth irregular and worn, and said nothing. Under the table, Delia's hand found hers. The estate was closed. They were escorted to the elevator. In the parking lot afterward, alone, she held the keys up to the flat October light and stopped. One of the 3 keys was not iron. It was brass, recently polished, catching the light differently from the others, and stamped into its face in characters small enough to miss. 7-2. She had been holding these keys for 6 weeks and had never noticed. She did not know yet what 7.2 meant. She would not know for 11 more days. Not until she stood in the ruins of her grandfather's farmhouse, and the floor told her something the ceiling was trying to hide. They arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after the will reading, in a car borrowed from a school friend whose parents had asked no questions and received no explanation. She had $9.43 left. Somewhere between Knoxville and the county line, she had traded her winter coat, a good one, quilted, bought the previous November, for 2 bags of groceries and a flashlight with fresh batteries. Delia had not said anything about the coat. She understood, at 12. More than a 12-year-old should have needed to. The drive took 47 minutes on a county road that narrowed twice to a single lane, climbing through second-growth forest that pressed against both shoulders of the car, close enough that branches dragged the passenger mirror on a curve. The property sat at the end of an unmarked gravel fork, identified only by a rusted mailbox with Callaway stenciled on its side, bent so far sideways by decades of weather that the name faced the ground more than the road. When they stepped out of the car, the smell reached her first. Wet rot and fallen leaves composting into something almost sweet, and beneath that, something else. Something mineral and dry and sealed, like stone that had not breathed in a very long time. Then the cold dropping 3 degrees between the car door and the tree line, settling into the collar of her shirt where the coat was no longer. Then the sound, which was the sound of nothing. Complete, rural, total silence, broken only by a creek running somewhere below the tree line, invisible and persistent. The farmhouse was worse than the documents had suggested, which she had prepared herself for, and worse than that preparation which she had not. The porch had partially collapsed along its left side. 2 windows were broken, their frames swollen with moisture. The front door hung from a single hinge at an angle that made entering feel like a question the house was asking. Inside, the smell shifted to something animal, musky, faintly ammonia-sharp, the evidence of habitation by creatures that had moved in once the last human left and saw no reason to go. The floorboards at the center of the front room sagged with visible intent. Delia stood at the threshold and said nothing. The sentence formed completely in her mind. "We can't stay here." Every word of it, fully assembled. She did not say it. She thought instead about Gerald Marsh's smile at the mahogany table. She thought about her mother's hand, barely able to hold a pen, signing something she had not been lucid enough to read. She said, "We'll start with the porch." She moved through the front room carefully, testing each floorboard with her foot before committing her weight, a slow, methodical crossing toward the far wall. Most boards groaned in the register she expected. But in the northwest corner, pressing down with her heel, she heard something different. Not a creak, a knock, dull, resonant, returning the pressure from below like a surface with depth behind it. She pressed again. The same knock. She knelt. In the beam of her flashlight, the boards here looked identical to every other board in the room. Same paint, same age-darkened grain, same decades of grime pressed into the cracks. But the grain ran perpendicular to every other board in the room, every single other board. She pressed her palm flat to the floor of the northwest corner and held very still, Cold air rose through the seam, faint, steady, and entirely impossible in a sealed farmhouse with no basement listed on any county document she had ever been given. She sat back on her heels in the dark and looked at the brass key stamped 7.2 and understood that her grandfather had been waiting, specifically, patiently, and with considerable skill, for exactly this moment. She found a crowbar in the porch debris and went to work. The perpendicular boards came up one at a time, each nailed with square-headed cut nails not manufactured since the 1940s. Someone had covered this floor deliberately and made it look original. Beneath the boards, a steel plate 36 inches square, set flush into poured concrete. With a single brass lock stamped 7.2, the key entered without resistance. The plate required both hands and her full body weight before the hydraulic hinge yielded, releasing air that smelled of cedar oil, aged paper, and dry iron sealed from weather for decades. She told Delia to stay above and call out if she heard a car. Then she went down the wooden ladder alone. The bunker was 19 feet by 11. Concrete floor, cedar-paneled walls, ceiling low enough that she ducked at the beams. Shelves along the far wall held sealed glass jars, wool blankets in oilskin, a hand pump water filter, and 2 oil lanterns that sloshed when lifted. Full, after decades, still full. Then she turned to the fourth wall and stopped. A door-height steel cabinet, riveted with 2 combination locks and a paper label taped to its center. For Eleanor, or her daughters, no one else. Eleanor was her mother's name. She tried her mother's birthday. She tried her own. Neither lock moved. Delia called down, "Try the date on the back of the keys," stamped into the oldest iron key, 03-1429, March 14th, 1929. 7 months before the crash, the cabinet opened. 61 American Gold Eagle coins in chamois cloth, dated 1910 to 1932. $14,300 in Series 1928 Federal Reserve notes, and beneath both, in a wax-sealed cedar box, 11 handwritten pages dated September 4th, 1962. Elias wrote that when Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102 in 1933 and ordered citizens to surrender their gold, he read the order and placed it in the stove. Not greed, principle. He had spent a decade converting his savings into gold eagles. He buried them and built this room and told no one. He wrote that he had kept the property outside the family estate because he had watched what happened when men married into accumulated things and treated those things as their own. He named no one. He did not need to. The original deed, filed October 3rd, 1947, naming Eleanor Calloway and her natural children as sole inheritors in perpetuity, was folded inside the box. No subsequent transfer was valid without Eleanor's notarized consent and that of at least one of her children. Neither had ever been given. One precaution, noted in the appendix. The deed was filed not under Calloway but under Prentice, his wife Margaret's birth name. Anyone searching under Calloway would find nothing. It had sat in the county records for 26 years, legally binding and completely invisible. She read that twice. She understood immediately why Gerald's attorney had found nothing. He closed with, "I was not a man who said things easily, but you were always the ones I meant to protect. I simply needed time to do it right." She sat on the concrete floor and did not weep. She calculated 61 gold eagles authenticated currency, a deed that voided everything Gerald believed he owned. The total exceeded everything taken from them. She folded the letter, took the deed, and put the brass key back in her pocket. She was halfway up the ladder when headlights swept across the farmhouse windows, and Delia whispered, "Someone's coming." She pulled the steel plate closed and stood in the dark, listening to car doors open, thinking about one name, Prentice. She heard their voices before she saw their faces. One speaking in the clipped cadences of legal training, the other with the flat patience of someone who delivered bad news for a living. She had 2 minutes. She closed the steel plate by feel, replaced the perpendicular boards without light, and walked out the front door as though she had been sitting there all evening. The deed was inside her jacket. Her face gave nothing. Two men stood on what remained of the porch. The first was Gerald's attorney, Dwight Feller, from the same Knoxville firm that handled the estate. Dark overcoat, document folder, no offered hand. The second was a county code enforcement officer with a clipboard and the expression of a man performing an unpleasant function he had not personally designed. Feller spoke without preamble. Gerald Marsh, as executor and named owner of record for the Callaway property. He paused on that phrase deliberately, had initiated a formal partition proceeding under Tennessee law. The girls were minors with no legal representation and no demonstrated capacity to maintain the structure. Gerald had standing to petition for a court-ordered sale. The proceeding was already filed. 19 days to vacate or contest. Contesting required a licensed attorney and a documented counterclaim. He let that sit, looking at two teenagers in a condemned farmhouse, letting the arithmetic speak for itself. The code enforcement officer added that the structure had been cited for unsafe habitability. If the property remained unoccupied and unimproved within 30 days, a condemnation mechanism would activate. Everything was legal, everything was thorough. They had left no visible opening. Feller swept the interior with a professional gaze. Sagging floors, broken windows, animal smell. His eyes crossed the northwest corner without slowing. He did not see the newer boards. He did not notice the perpendicular grain. Gerald had sent a man who looked for what he expected to find, and he had expected nothing. She nodded. She said she understood. She thanked them for clarifying the timeline. Feller handed her a copy of the partition filing before he left. She watched their car disappear into the tree line. Delia grabbed her arm immediately. She said, 19 days is more than enough. She turned the partition filing over and stopped. The property description on the back page listed the 43 acres under a deed reference number that matched nothing in the estate paperwork. Nothing from the Hargrove office. A discrepancy so small that no one without a reason to look would ever notice it. She had a reason. She looked at the deed number. She looked at the deed in her jacket pocket. She looked at the name Prentice written in her grandfather's careful hand, and she understood exactly what she had to do, and exactly how little time she needed to do it. She did not wait 19 days. She acted in 4. The morning after Feller's visit, she walked Delia to Bean Station, 8 miles on foot, and spent 6 hours in the county records annex with a researcher named Mrs. Adele Pruitt, a woman who had worked those records for 31 years. When the narrator explained what she was looking for and under what name, Mrs. Pruitt went very still. Nobody has asked for the Prentice cross-reference in 26 years. The deed was there. Filed October 3rd, 1947. Signed by Elias Prentice Callaway. His full legal name, never used in daily life, invisible to any attorney searching under Callaway. It named Eleanor Callaway and her natural children as sole heirs in perpetuity, with a clause stating no subsequent transfer was valid without Eleanor's notarized consent, and that of at least one child. Eleanor had never consented. Her daughters had never been notified. Gerald's claim was not contested. It was void. Mrs. Pruitt made 3 certified copies without being asked. She charged for 1. The hearing fell on day 17. Gerald and Feller arrived expecting a formality. The narrator arrived with attorney Clara Vance, who had agreed to work contingency before the phone call ended, and with Mrs. Pruitt and the certified Prentice deed. Gerald sat at the opposite table in his charcoal wool suit and did not look at the girls. 11 people in the courtroom. A court reporter whose keyboard filled every silence. Feller presented the partition petition with the confidence of a man who had never imagined needing a different argument. Clara Vance placed the 1947 deed before the judge. Honorable Marion Stokes reviewed it for 4 minutes. Then she looked up. Mr. Feller, Are you representing that your client was unaware of a prior deed filed in this county in 1947 under the grantor's legal name? Feller did not answer immediately. Gerald turned to look at him. She watched Gerald's expression make the same calculation she had made on a concrete floor 4 days earlier and find nothing. His certainty that the land was worthless, that the girls were powerless, that he had already won. Reaching the boundary of what the deed made possible and discovering no ground remaining. She looked at him across the table and said it quietly, "My grandfather was not a stubborn old man. He was a careful one. There's a difference." Gerald said nothing. Judge Stokes voided the partition petition. She ordered Gerald's executor status reviewed. She referred the estate transfer, the circumstances under which Eleanor Calloway had signed the family home deed while hospitalized and medicated, to the district attorney's office. In her bag beside the deed was a handwritten list. Every asset Gerald received, cross-referenced against the perpetuity clause. $445,300 requiring legal re-examination. She had written it the night before. She had known exactly what a voided petition would open. She walked out of that courthouse into November sunlight with Delia beside her and a certified copy of her grandfather's deed in her hand, and she did not look back, because there was nothing behind her worth looking at anymore. Gerald Marsh was indicted 14 months after the hearing on 2 counts of estate fraud and 1 count of undue influence related to the transfer of the family home. He pled no contest to the lesser charge. Clara Vance initiated civil recovery proceedings on behalf of the girls, and Gerald was ordered to repay $401,700 in estate assets. He declared personal bankruptcy 9 months after judgment. His second wife did not stay. The 61 gold eagles were assessed by a certified numismatist at a combined value of $214, $400 and retained by the girls as a pre-estate asset, entirely outside the recovery proceedings. The Series 1928 currency sold at auction in Knoxville for $31,800. The land, cleared of all competing claims and reassessed after improvements, was valued at $89,000. She had $31.17 on the night. Gerald turned off the porch light. She was 23 years old when she opened the Prentice Trust, a non-profit land trust in Granger County dedicated to helping Eastern Tennessee families protect generational property from predatory estate practices. She named it for the cross-reference that saved them. By the time of this telling, the Prentice Trust has helped 47 families preserve property worth a combined $6.3 million. Delia Calloway is its legal director. On her desk, she keeps one thing: the brass key stamped 7.2 on its original iron ring, cold and irregular and heavier than it looks. She was 16 and 4 months old, standing in wet gravel with a split sneaker and $31.17 and a set of keys she didn't yet understand, watching a porch light click off in the dark. Now she sits in morning light that comes through a south-facing window, warm and still and purposeful, and the brass key catches the light from across the desk, and she thinks the same thought she thought that night. He left us something. Now she knows what it means. Her grandfather did not hide gold from the government. He hid it from time, from the particular kind of man who arrives after the funeral with paperwork already signed. Elias Calloway understood that the most dangerous thing a woman could be left with was nothing anyone could see the value of. So he made sure that what he left his girls could only be found by someone who already knew how to look.